Thank you for taking time to learn more about the proposed changes to the Esplanade and Mill Street. The city has been studying ways to improve these streets, and we want your feedback on the proposals by March 14th. Today you will be hearing from two members of the City of Toronto design team. I'm Adam Popper, the project manager, and I'm joined by Owen McGahey, the project engineer. Policy, plans, and goals. This project is built on a foundation of policies including the city's official plan, the Vision Zero Road Safety Plan, and Transform TO. Toronto's council-approved cycling network plan is based on three pillars: connect, grow, and renew the cycling network. This part of the city has seen recent extensions of the cycling network such as Sumac Street last year, enhancements to existing routes such as Shooter Street, and we'll be seeing more such improvements to Cherry Street south of Lakeshore later this year, but gaps still exist. The Cycling Network Plan's 2019 to 2021 implementation plan includes the Esplanade and Mill Street. This 2-kilometer corridor would form a vital cycling route for local residents and businesses and would help people cycle to the Lakeshore East and Lower Don multi-use trails and to the Waterfront Trail. The project goals are to improve safety for everyone, make walking, cycling, and taking transit more attractive, and maintain access to local and citywide destinations. The project scope involves working mostly within existing curbs as no major road reconstruction is planned in the foreseeable future. However, there is an opportunity to work with the planned David Crombie Park revitalization. Here are some of the project's context and considerations. Toronto has seen an increase in walking, cycling, and transit mode share and a decrease in people driving. In these neighborhoods, the majority of trips are on foot, bike, and transit. In addition to the vibrant heritage of both the St. Lawrence and Distillery District neighborhoods, more than 5,300 residential units, 650 hotel units, and thousands of square meters of commercial development is under construction or proposed right now. By building a bikeway before new residents and employees move in, we can provide an alternative mode choice at precisely the time people are developing their transportation habits. The city's own redevelopment plans for key sites includes the St. Lawrence Market redevelopment, opening in spring next year, and the first Parliament site undergoing a master planning process. The Ontario line as proposed would change transportation patterns in the neighborhood. The Esplanade Mill Bikeway would be within a block of the proposed Corktown station and a short bike ride to the East Harbour Interchange station. This project would help stitch together a series of parks, improve access to green spaces, and reduce traffic stress, noise, and pollution. There have been over 340 reported collisions along the corridor between 2015 and 2019, 10% involving someone walking or cycling, and 1% leading to serious injury and death. This does not include the recent death of Trisha Waldron, an active community member at the Mill Street and Cherry Street intersection. The Esplanade and Mill Street are busy year-round with people walking. Near Yonge Street, people move to and from Union Station. The Esplanade carries many visitors to the St. Lawrence Market. The Distillery District is always busy and becomes a regional destination during its annual Christmas market. Some people cycle on the Esplanade and Mill Street alongside traffic, but the number of cars traveling on these roads today exceeds the city's threshold for people cycling and driving to mix. Some people choose instead to cycle on the pedestrian promenade in David Crombie Park, which creates uncomfortable conditions for people both walking and cycling. People driving are using the Esplanade and other local streets to bypass Front Street and Jarvis Street on their way to or from the Gardiner Expressway or the commercial area west of Jarvis. This non-local traffic leads to congestion on the Esplanade. On the other hand, taxis, ride-hailing services, delivery vehicles, and access to parking facilities brings the area to life and supports local businesses and are important considerations. In pre-COVID traffic conditions, the Ttc 121 bus is sometimes delayed because of the non-local traffic. This bus is vital to residents and businesses, especially for local seniors. The existing curbside uses you see here and several others have been analyzed and considered alongside the curbside uses on nearby streets, and more than 5,000 off-street parking spaces. 20 meters between the curbs would be required to fit an ideal design for all road users. But there is only half that, between 9 and 11 meters for different blocks. What we heard. The city conducted an initial round of public consultation in fall 2019. We've also gathered public feedback from the Active TO Quiet Street Survey and the Esplanade 2020 Senior Safety Zone Review. A summary of public feedback can be viewed on the project website. In addition to the considerations mentioned, we heard there's a desire to make these changes as soon as possible and that they have long-lasting benefits. Which leads us to what is being proposed. Physically separated bike lanes, also known as cycle tracks, are proposed to be added to both the Esplanade and Mill Street. For both streets, bi-directional cycle tracks are proposed. Bi-directional cycle tracks allow cycling in both directions on one side of the road. They're attractive to a wide range of people of all ages and skill levels. They would connect to other bidirectional trails to the east and would encourage people to use the cycling facilities instead of the promenade. Let's focus first on the Esplanade. A south side bidirectional cycle track would be added to the whole of the Esplanade corridor. Some blocks would be dedicated to TTC only, and others would be converted to one-ways. A context-sensitive approach is applied to each block, but also considered at the network level. Owen will now walk you through the proposed changes block by block, starting at Yonge Street.
Thank you, Adam. Between Yonge Street and Scott Street, the Esplanade would have one vehicle travel lane per direction. At the Yonge intersection, an exclusive east-west pedestrian and bicycle signal phase is under study. This would provide dedicated time for people to cross Yonge on foot or bike, followed by dedicated time for drivers to turn from the Esplanade or 141 Bay onto Yonge Street. Access to and from the Green Pea Garage and both directions of the Esplanade would be maintained. Bollards would be used to narrow the driveway opening and slow vehicle turns across the cycle track and sidewalk. Most curbside activities would be prohibited through no standing regulations. Parking and loading is available on nearby Scott Street, and 2,000 parking spaces are available within the Green Pea Garage. The Scott Street intersection would remain an all-way stop, including for the cycle track. The eastbound lane would be wider before the intersection to provide more room for wheel transloading at 25 the Esplanade. Between Scott Street and Church Street, the Esplanade would become one-way westbound for vehicles. Access to the Novotel and private garage would be maintained both from this block and via the laneway at the foot of Church Street. To improve sightlines for drivers exiting the driveways framed by the colonnade, the bikeway would bend toward the center of the road. A dedicated no-standing zone would serve pickup and drop-off, including coach buses. The commercial loading zone would be shifted, with the remaining space west of the bus stop available for parking. At the Church Street intersection, the bus stop for the eastbound 121 would be relocated onto the west side of Church Street, just north of the intersection. Two-way traffic would be maintained between Church Street and Market Street to provide circulation in both directions. The two bus stops just west of Market Street would be removed due to close spacing with the stops at Church or Jarvis. Goods loading would be permitted within the no parking zones on Church Street. The accessible loading zone on the south side of the Esplanade would be maintained. When the new St. Lawrence Market North building opens, the tent will be removed and the lot will become vacant. This would allow the cycle track to be shifted above the curb and parallel to the sidewalk. This would reduce conflict with trucks using the St. Lawrence Market loading dock. The cycle track would cross the south leg of the Esplanade-Jarvis intersection, with the south crosswalk next to it connecting to the Park Promenade. To remove conflicts across the south crosswalk, several traffic changes on this block are proposed. Wilton Street would remain open as a two-way street. The left turn from Wilton onto northbound Jarvis would be restricted due to the close spacing with the signal at the Esplanade. The east approach to the Esplanade Market intersection would become one-way westbound. A short eastbound bus lane would allow continued TTC and Wheel-Trans access. Vehicle traffic on the Esplanade eastbound would be required to turn right onto Market Street. The westbound left turn from the Esplanade onto Jarvis would be prohibited at all times to discourage traffic destined for the Gardiner or Lakeshore from using the Esplanade. The westbound left turn from the Esplanade onto Market Street would also be prohibited to reinforce the Jarvis turn restriction and prevent drivers from bypassing it on Market Street or Wilton Street. Access to the St. Lawrence Market loading dock would be maintained to and from Jarvis in both directions to provide direct arterial access. Trucks could also exit to the west. Bump outs and a small median island on the east side of the Esplanade and Market Street intersection are under review. These would shorten the crossing distance of the east crosswalk, calm westbound traffic approaching the intersection, and provide a place for additional signage reinforcing the eastbound bus lane. Between Jarvis Street and George Street, the Esplanade would be converted to one-way westbound except Ttc to prevent eastbound traffic infiltration into the neighborhood and to reduce the overall volume so accessible loading, westbound traffic, and buses in both directions can share the narrowed roadway space. The block from George Street to Frederick Street would become one-way eastbound except Ttc to reduce westbound traffic infiltration through the neighborhood and further reduce traffic on the Jarvis to George block. Eastbound vehicle traffic would be permitted from George Street to Lower Sherburne Street. Westbound vehicle traffic would be permitted from Lower Sherburne Street to Frederick Street and from George Street to Jarvis Street. Drivers would not be permitted to enter the Esplanade eastbound from Lower Jarvis Street. Drivers would also not be permitted to turn left from the Esplanade westbound onto Jarvis southbound. An eastbound bus lane would be provided from Jarvis Street to George Street. A westbound bus lane would be provided from Frederick Street to George Street. These bus lanes allow two-way Ttc bus and Wheel-Trans service to be maintained between Lower Jarvis Street and Lower Sherburne Street. George Street would be converted to one-way southbound with northbound contraflow bike lane from the Esplanade to Wilton Street to prevent bypassing of the westbound prohibition via Wilton. Zebra crossings would be painted at all four crosswalks at the George Street and Frederick Street intersections. The accessible loading zone in front of 140 the Esplanade would be maintained. The roadway would be widened slightly to provide more room for vehicles to pass a stopped vehicle. All parking would be removed in this segment. Bus stops would be shifted to improve spacing. At the Sherburne intersection, the proposed cycle track would intersect the existing Sherburne cycle tracks. Two-stage turn boxes would be provided to facilitate bicycle turns between the Esplanade and Sherburne. Between Sherburne and Princess, the Esplanade would be converted to Ttc only in both directions. The Princess to Berkeley block would be converted to one-way westbound to maintain curbside space along the north curb in front of the community center and Market Lane School. The conversion of this block to one-way westbound would require adjustments to the existing Ttc routes on this block. The eastbound 121 bus is proposed to turn north at Princess Street, then go east along Front Street. The loop for the 65 Parliament bus would be reversed to go clockwise so that it would run westbound on this block. The westbound 121 bus would maintain its current routing. Bus stops would be relocated in accordance with the proposed route changes. A westbound stop would be provided along the north curb near the community center to serve the 65 and westbound 121. The eastbound 121 would maintain a stop at the Esplanade and Princess intersection, likely relocated to the northeast corner. An additional eastbound stop is proposed on Front Street at Berkeley. Removal of the existing weekday morning westbound left turn prohibition at Front and Berkeley is under review, since westbound traffic infiltration would be prevented by the proposed Ttc only operation between Sherburne and Princess. Zebra crosswalk markings would be added at the Princess Street and Berkeley Street intersections. East of the pedestrian crosswalk, the 4 accessible parking spaces would become 2 accessible loading spaces. This block has one of the highest levels of ride-hailing activity on the corridor. Some curbside space would be designated as either no standing or short-term 10-minute parking to allow for passenger pickup and drop-off activity, with the remaining space available for parking. When we zoom back out, you can see that each block is considered separately to account for the immediate context. When considered together, the use of the Esplanade as a cut-through or bypass to major roads would be eliminated. The speed limit on the Esplanade is proposed to be reduced from 40 to 30 kilometers per hour. Pedestrian and bicycle head starts are proposed where other signal timing strategies for reducing conflicts are not feasible. George Street between the Esplanade and Wilton Street would be made one-way southbound to prevent Wilton Street from becoming a bypass of the one-way conversion on the Esplanade. It would also reduce traffic near St. Michael's School. School bus loading on the west side of George Street south of the Esplanade would remain, but parking would be removed. The north half of Farquhar's Lane would be made one-way northbound to reduce local traffic infiltration and vehicle volume crossing the busy Front Street sidewalk. Otherwise, intersecting streets would not be changed. Access to the neighborhood by vehicle would be available to Front Street, Yonge Street, Sherburne Street, and Jarvis Street, depending on the block. To enhance the pedestrian focus of both Market Street and Front Street, westbound left turns from Front Street onto Market Street would be prohibited. Westbound left turns at King and Jarvis would be prohibited during weekday afternoons to address existing streetcar delay and prevent westbound displacement shifting from the Esplanade. Eastbound and westbound through restrictions would remain. The addition of pedestrian head start at the Front and Jarvis intersection is under review. Several tools would be used to communicate the traffic changes to road users. Prior to installation, information flyers would be sent to area residents to communicate the traffic pattern changes. New regulations would be communicated using signage, pavement markings, and signals where applicable. Solid red pavement markings would be installed within the proposed exclusive TTC lanes to emphasize that these lanes are only for transit use. Now we'll talk briefly about Parliament Square Park.
With the number of people walking and cycling, the existing park path is too narrow, so a dedicated bikeway is proposed through the parking lot just to the north of the park.
We will now continue east along Mill Street. A new south side bi-directional cycle track would be added to the whole Mill Street corridor and one block on Bayview Avenue up to Front Street East. Some blocks would be converted to one-way westbound to free up space for the cycle track. Now let's walk through the context-sensitive design block by block. The bi-directional cycle track would cross the south side of the Parliament intersection. A fully protected signal phase is proposed for the south crosswalk and bike crossing, separating these crossings from vehicles turning left from westbound Mill. Between Parliament and Trinity, Mill Street would be converted to one-way westbound for vehicles. The existing parking lane along the south curb would remain but be offset from the curb, with the cycle track placed between the parking lane and sidewalk. To accommodate both passenger pickup and goods deliveries, the short-term parking zone is proposed to be doubled from 2 to 4 spaces. The remaining space on the south side would continue to provide the current no standing, no parking, and paid parking regulations. Between Trinity and Cherry, Mill Street would be converted to one-way westbound for vehicles, with a parking and loading lane along the north curb, freeing space to be reallocated for the cycle track. The bi-directional cycle track would continue along the south side of the street. The existing 10-minute parking spaces on the south side of Mill Street would be relocated to the north side. The existing 15-minute parking and accessible loading zones along the north curb would remain. The rest of the north side parking would also remain. A daytime school bus loading zone is proposed on Trinity Street, north of Mill. The bi-directional cycle track would cross the south side of the Cherry intersection. A fully protected signal phase is proposed for the south crosswalk and bike crossing, separating these crossings from vehicles turning left from westbound Mill. Northbound right turns are presently prohibited for both vehicles and bicycles due to the conflict with the streetcar tracks. A dedicated 2-stage turn box and exclusive signal phase is proposed so that this turn can be legalized for bicycles. Northbound bicycle left turns would also use this box. Other two-stage turn boxes would accommodate bicycle turns from the Mill cycle track to northbound Cherry and from southbound Cherry to eastbound Mill. Here is a rendering of the Mill-Cherry intersection as proposed, showing bicycle turn queue boxes, paint, and signal work. East of Cherry, the existing painted bicycle lanes in each direction would be converted to a bidirectional cycle track along the south side. Vehicles would be allowed in both directions. Parking would be removed from the south side laybys since they would be blocked by the cycle track separation. The bus loading zone would be relocated to the north side layby between Cooperage and Rolling Mills. Continuing east, the existing painted bicycle lanes in each direction would be converted to a bidirectional cycle track along the south side. At the Bayview and Mill intersection, the bidirectional cycle track would provide a direct connection to the Corktown Common Trail and onward connections to the Lower Don Trail, Lakeshore East Trail, and the proposed East Harbor GO and Ontario Line station. Vehicle traffic at this intersection would be converted to one-way southbound to westbound. Mill would be one-way westbound from Bayview to Tannery with two-way operation west of Tannery. Parking would be removed from the south side laybys since they would be blocked by the cycle track separation. Parking would be preserved in the north side laybys. On Bayview Avenue between Mill and Front, the existing painted bicycle lanes in each direction would be converted to a bidirectional cycle track on the east side. This block would become one-way southbound for vehicles. Parking would be preserved in the west side layby and removed from the east side layby. A two-stage turn box would be provided at the Bayview and Front intersection to allow people cycling southbound on Bayview to cross from the existing bicycle lane to the cycle track. Now, back to Adam.
Thanks, Owen. These are the Ttc routes today. In the new configuration, the eastbound 121 would turn on Church Street, not Scott Street, and on Princess Street, not Berkeley. It would continue on Front Street and up to Bridgepoint Hospital before returning on Mill Street westbound. Bus stop locations would also be moved to improve the speed and reliability of these routes. Permit parking areas 6H, 6K, and 6N serve this area of the city. With the proposed changes, areas 6H and 6K would remain under capacity. Area 6N is at capacity today. This would be maintained by adding permit parking spaces to Front Street. Implementation. Phase 1 east of Lower Sherburne Street is proposed to be installed toward the end of 2021 to maintain a cycling connection between the downtown and the waterfront during planned construction. Phase 2 is proposed to begin west of Sherburne Street in 2022. This allows for the planned removal of the St. Lawrence Market tent. For most of the corridor, road-level bidirectional cycle tracks with concrete curbs, paint, and new signal timing is proposed to be implemented over the next 2 years. Phase 3, as early as 2024, could include raised cycle tracks along David Crombie Park, raised cycle and pedestrian crossings at minor park intersections, permanent raised TTC stops, and potential for protected intersections. Have questions? Please visit the project website for more information. A public feedback survey can be accessed at toronto.ca/Esplanade Mill. The comment period will close on March 14th. Staff will report to Toronto City Council for approval in May and June 2021.